The focus for topic 5 is comparing real numbers. So you may have to kind of reach back into your brain for some of this, but we use what are called inequality symbols when comparing numbers. So hopefully you have like a general memory or understanding of what inequality symbols are. But just kind of quickly, we have this image here. It shows what the greater than symbol looks like, the less than symbol. We also have greater than or equal, less than or equal. And you're definitely going to see these inequality symbols come up throughout this course, okay? So having this basic understanding now is going to really pay off later in the course. So the inequality symbols, this little statement over here, it says the inequality symbols are read from left to right. That is to state that 2 is less than 5, we would write 2 with the less than symbol 5. So again, you read inequalities from left to right, okay? So what I want to do is look at comparing some of these types of numbers or these pairs of numbers, okay? So example 7 says insert an inequality symbol between each pair of numbers to make a true statement, okay? Sometimes you are going to have to do a little bit of work, okay? So for example, if you have fractions, you can compare fractions two different ways. You can get a common denominator, and then once you have a common denominator, get equivalent forms of those fractions. And then once you have equivalent forms of the fractions that have the same denominator, you can just simply compare the numerators, or you could convert your fractions to decimals. That sometimes can be a little bit quicker. All right. So just know that in some of these cases, we're going to have to do a little bit of work, but otherwise just kind of think on a number line. Okay. So part A says negative 12 and negative 15. So which inequality symbol would we place between those two numbers so that from left to right, this reads true? So think of a number line. All right. If I have a number line, let's see, say 0 is way over here. And let's say negative 12 is right here. Then negative 15 would be right here. When you're dealing with negative numbers, the further away from 0 the number is on the number line, the smaller the number is. So when you have two numbers that are on the same side of the number line and they're negative, whichever one is closer to 0 is bigger. So in this case, negative 12 is bigger than negative 15. So we would want to write this as negative 12 is greater than negative 15, okay? Now, part B, we have those fractions. So again, you can deal with fractions in two ways. You can do the LCD, get equivalent forms of those fractions, and then compare the numerators, or you can just convert your fractions to decimals, okay? So if we want to do a little side work here, we could do this by hand, or you can kind of cheat and use your calculator, okay? And I'm not totally opposed to that. So let's remember 2/5 and 9/20. So let's go over to the calculator. 2/5 is kind of easy to do in your head, but we'll go ahead and use the calculator. We want to do 2 divided by 5, so we have 0.4. And then we also had 9/20, so 9 divided by 20 is 0.45. So let's go back to the other screen and learn how to compare decimals. All right, so we know that 2/5 is equal to 0.4 and 9/20 was equal to 0.45. So as long as what is in front of the decimal is the same, we can kind of ignore it. We just want to compare what's after the decimal. So what we do is we make sure we have the same number of decimal places. So I have 0.4 and then I have 0.45. Since 0.45 has two decimal places, I'm going to make 0.4 have two decimal places by just adding a 0. And since the stuff in front of the decimal is the same, we're really just kind of comparing 40 to 45. Well, which of those two is bigger? We know that 45 is bigger than 40, so that tells me that 0.45 is bigger than 0.4, so that tells me 9/20 is bigger than 2/5. So to read from left to right, we want to make sure we put in a less than symbol. 2/5 is less than 9/20, okay? Now for part C, we have just decimals. Luckily, they both have a 0 in front of the decimal point, so that means it's kind of easier to compare because you just have, well, it's not really easier, but when the stuff in front of the decimal matches, you have to compare the decimal part. So the decimal parts both have 4 decimal places. So we're essentially comparing 1022 to 1202. So which of those two numbers is bigger? Well, in my experience, 1202 is definitely bigger than 1022. And again, you can kind of think of a number line. If we have 0 here and 1022 here, We got 1,202 here then. And if you're on the right-hand side of the number line, the positive side, the further away from zero you are, the bigger. So we would say in this case that 0.1022 is less than 0.1202 because 1,022 is less than 1,202. Okay, now for part D, you have a decimal and you have a fraction. So let's go ahead and convert the fraction to its decimal format. Now, anytime you have a denominator of 5, it's not too hard to convert, but I'll go ahead and let you cheat and use your calculator. So we should get 0.8, but let's prove it. So we want to take 4 divided by 5, and we do get 0.8. So let's go back to the worksheet. So we know that 4/5 is 0.8. We also have 0.75. And remember, when you're comparing decimals, like the stuff after the decimal point, you need to make sure you have the same number of decimal places. So I have 0.80 and 0.75. So then essentially what I'm comparing is 80 versus 75. So again, if we were thinking a number line, 80 is further away from 0 on the positive side than 75 is, so that makes 80 bigger. We also just know in terms of our day-to-day life that 80 is bigger than 75. So we would say 4/5 is greater than 0.75. Okay? So that's it. Make sure you have a general understanding of comparing numbers. Sometimes comparing the negatives can be a little harder. Comparing decimals, if you're comparing the stuff after the decimal point, just make sure you have the same number of decimal places and then compare them as if they were whole numbers. Fractions, it can be 2 different methods. You could convert them to equivalent forms of the fractions with an LCD, or you can just use decimals. I think the decimals tend to be a bit easier to work with, but either way, have an understanding of how to use inequality symbols. Remember which inequality symbol is which, because inequality symbols will certainly come back up in future chapters.